प्रातः स्मरामि हृदि संस्फुरदात्मतत्त्वम् सच्चित् सुखं परमहं सगतिं तुरीयम् यत् स्वप्नजागर सुषुप्तिमवैति नित्यम् तद्ब्रह्म निष्कलमहं न च भूतसङ्गः तपोभिक्षीणपापानां शान्तानां वीतरागिणाम् मुमुक्षूणामपेक्षोऽयम् आत्मबोधो विधीयते बोधोऽन्यसाधनेभ्यो हि साक्षान्मोक्षैकसाधनम् पाकस्य वह्निवज्ञानं विना मोक्षो न सिद्ध्यति। हरिओम, वेलकम बैक टू जेम्स ऑफ भगवद गीता। कल हमने 15वें अध्याय का आरंभ किया था। वी हैड स्टार्टेड द 15th चैप्टर of the Bhagavad Gita, our discussion with the famous metaphor of the giant Ashwatha. पीपल के पेड़ के उदाहरण से हमने चर्चा शुरू की थी। This is a very famous metaphor and may have all seen many images of the upside down people tree. In fact, yesterday after the class, I received several images. So clearly this is a very famous imagery, a very famous metaphor. And उस metaphor के पीछे क्या मतलब है, क्या meaning है? That is what we are in the middle of discussing. So we'll carry on from where we left off yesterday. We were discussing the first verse, the verse number 1 of and there are this example of the giant metaphor. It spreads across 3 verses, verse 1 to 3. So we'll take up all of it. So just quickly recapping, Bhagavan talks about this giant Ashwatha tree. They speak of the imperishable Ashwatha, the giant fig tree with root above and branches below. So this is a giant fig tree, but upside down, a giant peepal tree, but upside down. Try to imagine it. And the root above, representing the source of the tree, is a metaphor, a symbolism for Brahman, for God. God is the source of this world. God is the root of this world. Everything comes about, everything occurs, everything happens, everything is sustained by the power of the Lord. The pure consciousness which illumines this entire world. The substratum which supports this entire world. However, there are very many ways to think about it, which we have discussed throughout our study out here. It is the substratum of all things. It is the supporter of all. So the root represents that source, that support, from where the tree gets nourished. So roots above, branches below, whose leaves are hymns of Vedas. He who knows this gains the wisdom of the Vedas. And this metaphor continues into the second verse, where he describes further this tree. So this is where we will continue. We'll start with verse number 2 of chapter 15. We'll chant it together. अधश्चोर्धं प्रसितास्तस्य शाखाः गुणप्रवृद्धा विषयप्रवालाः अधश्च मूलान्यसुनन्ततानि कर्मानुबन्धीनि मनुष्यलोके अधश्चोर्ध्वं प्रसितास्तस्य शाखाः गुणप्रवृद्धा विषयप्रवालाः अधश्च मूलान्यमनुस्तदानि कर्मानुबंधीनि मनुष्य लोके, उसकी गुणों द्वारा पली विषय रूपी कोपले, जिसकी शाखाएं नीचे और ऊपर फैली हुई हैं, तथा मनुष्य लोक में कर्मों के अनुसार बांधने वाले जड़े नीचे फैल रही हैं, नॉट सही है, रही हैं. Its branches. So he's continuing his description of the Ashwatha tree. Roots above, branches below, and now he's talking further. Its branches are spread below and above. So it's, अगर आपने अश्वत्थ पेड़ देखी है तो it's got many intertwining, entangling branches. It's a very dense tree. It's a very dense tree. So the branches are spread below and above, nourished by the gunas. Again, he's bringing in another symbolism. The sap of this tree is the gunas. Everything, every object in this world is composed of, made up of gunas. You are essentially nourished by your gunas. What does it mean? You are who you are because of your gunas. So nourished by the gunas, these branches nourished by the gunas, with buds as sense objects. The buds are those point of the trees which lead to branches, which lead to further growth. It is these sense objects, the desires for the sense objects, which lead to further progression of your life, as it were. And roots stretch below as actions binding men in the world. And roots stretch below as actions binding men in the world. Now notice, here he is using the multiple for roots. He's not using singular root. In the previous verse, he said, with root above and branches below. Here he's talking about roots, multiple, plural. These roots represent the secondary roots of the Ashwatha. All the sort of pillars that come down from an Ashwatha tree. If you've seen that people tree, what happens? The tree also sends down certain shoots, and those things go into the ground and they create secondary root systems. So those secondary roots are what he's talking about here. They stretch below as actions binding men in the world. These secondary roots represent your vasanas. They emerge, no doubt, out of the primary root. But these secondary roots, these numerous, as it were, roots, represent your vasanas. And these vasanas are what grow, are what determine the kind of activities you perform in the world. And these activities bind you to the world. So it requires a little bit of creative thinking. See, this is poetry. This is not to be taken literally. Now, you can't try to literally extrapolate this. This requires a little bit of creative freedom. The poet out here, the great sage Vyasa, has used this creative freedom. So you have this upside down tree, the Ashwatha. Remember, Ashwatha means that which does not remain the same. And yet it is imperishable. This world seemingly is imperishable. It ends in, it seems to continue endlessly. And yet it does not remain the same. At no point is the world constant. There is a constant flux of change. And this world, he's talking about this macrocosm. What are the different aspects of it? The root of the macrocosm, the root of this whole jagat, this whole world, is Brahman, the very source. And from this root emerge these secondary roots, the vasanas, the very ignorance. Remember, vasanas, the vasanas you are made up of, the vasanas I am made up of, they determine my personality, determine your personality. As your vasanas, so are you. Now, these vasanas, your individuality, are essentially the barrier between you and God. This individuality of yours, your vasanas, are the barrier between you and God. You have imagined yourself to be this limited, restricted individual, and thus created a barrier. This is me, and separate and distinct and bigger and other than me is God. So vasanas are synonymous with ignorance of God. Vasanas are synonymous with ignorance of God, ignorance of Brahman. Now, how does ignorance of Brahman itself happen? How does one become ignorant of Brahman? How do you become ignorant of something if that thing exists? How do you become ignorant of something if that thing exists? If it doesn't exist, there's nothing to be ignorant of. So Brahman exists and you are ignorant of Brahman. You are ignorant of God. That ignorance of God, that ignorance of Brahman is called vasanas. And from vasanas emerge your individuality and this world that you experience. Stay with me. It's a little subtle topic, so stay with me. From Brahman arises ignorance of Brahman. Because Brahman exists, there arises ignorance of Brahman. Go back to the rope and snake analogy, the very famous rope and snake analogy, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. A young child walks into a dark room and there is a rope lying in the ground. A young child walks into a dark room. You can't see anything. And there's a rope lying in the ground. And he suddenly trips on the rope. Now, he doesn't know what he's tripped on. Why? Because the room is dark. And he imagines what he has tripped on to be a snake. He imagined what he has tripped on to be a snake. Why? You can't blame him. He can't see the rope. But he's approximated. The rope is a certain diameter. It is 6 inches thick. It is 10 inches thick or whatever. It is 6 feet long. The perfect description of a snake. It is slightly coarse in texture. It's like a snake and he can't see it. So the rope exists on the ground. And because of ignorance of the rope arises the snake. How does the snake arise? The child is imagining there to be a snake. How did that imagination of the snake arise? Because the rope existed. The rope was on the ground. The rope existed. And that gave rise to ignorance of the rope. Ignorance of the rope was possible only because the rope existed lying there. If there was no rope that existed, you wouldn't have imagined. No, nobody can imagine out of the blue. Nobody imagines out of the blue. That is madness. If you imagine things out of the blue, that is madness. So when there is a rope on the ground and you trip on it, there arises the ignorance of the rope, which leads to the creation, the misapprehension, big words. The non-apprehension of the rope gives rise to the misapprehension of the snake. How did the snake come about? Because of the non-apprehension of the rope. And how did the non-apprehension of the rope happen in the first place? Because the rope existed. Now take this example. Stay with this example. Take this example. Brahman exists. Brahman alone exists. Because Brahman exists, it is possible to be ignorant of Brahman. Otherwise, it wouldn't be possible to be ignorant of Brahman. Brahman alone exists. But due to ignorance of Brahman arises the misapprehension of the world. This misapprehension, this misunderstanding, this imagination of the world. The world is an imaginary projection upon Brahman, upon God, upon the reality. Just as the snake is an imaginary projection upon the rope. The snake is an imaginary projection upon the rope. Where there is rope, you're actually imagining there to be snake. because of ignorance. Similarly, where there is Brahman, you're imagining to be a world made up of pluralistic things and beings with different qualities and different natures and different features and aspects and all sorts of things. Now, the snake is similar to the rope. The reason the imagination of the snake came about is because it matches the rope. Where there is a rope, you won't imagine there to be an elephant. Where there is a rope, you'll imagine there to be something similar to a rope, like a snake. Why? Because it is certain thickness, certain length, certain coarseness. So the qualities of the rope are reflected in the qualities of the imagined object. The qualities of the rope are reflected in the qualities of the imagined object. Just as when you look into a mirror, what's happening? The qualities of the image are a reflection of the quality of the object, right? When there is a plain mirror, the quality of the image, what you see inside the mirror, is a reflection of the quality of the object. So the image reflects the object. The image reflects the object. The rope reflects the snake. Similarly, the world reflects Brahman. There are certain qualities, as it were, about the world that are a direct reflection of Brahman. What are those qualities? Essentially, there's only one quality: infinitude. Sarvam. Sarvam. Brahman is infinite, inconceivable. This infinite nature of Brahman is reflected also in the world we experience. This infinite nature of Brahman is reflected in the world we experience. How? The world broadly has three dimensions. If you have to think of it, three dimensions: space, time, and causation. Space, time, and causation. The first dimension, space. The world appears to be infinitely extending into space. Where's the beginning of the world? Where's the end of the world? Where did the world begin? Say, if I go 10,000 kilometers this way, will the world end? If I go 10,000 kilometers that way, will the world end? If I go 10,000 kilometers up, 10,000, okay, fine. If I go 1 million kilometers on the left, will it end? How big is this world? And when I mean this world, I don't only mean Earth. Huh? Now humans have experienced the far reaches of the cosmos. How far does the cosmos extend? How far does this universe, this created world extend? Ascharya, Ascharya. We don't know. It extends infinitely. Infinite means beyond your conception, beyond my conception. We cannot conceive the end of the world. So in fact, science says it is constantly expanding. Science, it is constantly expanding. An interesting question to ask: if it is expanding, where is it expanding to? You say the world is expanding. It's expanding. Big Bang. Immediately after the Big Bang, there was an explosion, and it caused a rapid expansion of the universe, as it were. And that process is happening even now. Science says this, not me. Question to ask is, where is it expanding to? What is that place that lies beyond the world? I'm only asking a question. I don't know the answer to this. I'm saying we don't think about these things. We don't think about the infinite nature of the world. We're just caught up in our own lives, thinking about unnecessary things day in, day out, caught up with our silly problems and attachments. We don't even think about this wondrous thing. If you if you think about these things, even for a day, your life will be much more peaceful. Forget about finding answers to this. Even if you think about it, your orientation will be completely different. They say astronauts are never the same once they experience the space. I don't blame them, of course. When they see the vastness vastness of the cosmos, when they see their home, which is Earth, this huge Earth, as a small ball hanging in space, imagine the kind of perspective it creates. So, where does the world start? Where does the world end? We don't know. In terms of space, time. When did the world start? When did the world end? Or when will the world end? When did the world start? Even if you say the world, this universe as it is started with the Big Bang. Let's assume you say that. What was there before the Big Bang? Immediately you ask that question. What was there before the Big Bang? Was there something from which this came about? So we don't know when it started or what was there before this inception. Was there a universe before this? Was there a destruction before this? See, science is coming to these sort of conclusions, these sort of mystical conclusions, which we quite aren't able to comprehend and accept completely right now. But these are all things worth contemplating upon. And the third, so time. When did the world begin? When will the world end? After it will end, will there be another world? So is it a destruction or desillusion? See, in Vedanta, in the Indic tradition, they don't talk about destruction. They talk about dissolution. They talk about avyakt. Vyakt se avyakt. Even if this world becomes avyakt, which is called pralaya, what happens after pralaya? There is another rise. There is another creation, another kalpa, as it were. So even after destruction, even after dissolution, there is another creation. So time doesn't end, as it were, in the world. Time seems to extend infinitely. And causation. Why did the world begin? We are right now where we are because of a chain of causation. You are what you are because of a chain of causation going back. You are the effect of your parents. Your parents are the cause, you are the effect. Your parents are the effect of their parents. Their parents are the cause, your grandparents are the cause, your parents are the effect. Your grandparents are the effect of their parents, your great grandparents. Who was your father's first father? Every father seems to have a father before him. Every mother seems to have a mother or father before them. When did this chain of causation begin? Or rather, what was the first cause? What was the primeval cause which caused creation? And what will be the last effect? See, every cause is an effect. Every effect becomes a cause. That's the chain of causation. Question to ask is, when did the first cause, or what was the first cause, and what will be the last effect after which this chain will end? We don't know. It's inconceivable. That's the point. So space, time, and causation appears to extend infinitely. This world seems to have acquired this infinite nature. Where is this coming from? It's a reflection of Brahman. Just as the image is a reflection of the object, the snake is a reflection of the rope. The snake is a reflection of the rope. So now coming to this point, this world is a misapprehension created by the non-apprehension of Brahman. This world is an imagination created by the ignorance of Brahman. Don't be too hard on yourself if you can't understand exactly what this means. Trust me, it takes a long time. I still haven't understood. If I had understood, I would not be sitting here. Each time you discuss this, each time you talk about this idea, little by little, you get a better sense of it, perhaps. Brahman alone exists. Brahma Satya, Jagat Mithya. This mithya jagat, how has it come about? The satya, ignorance of the satya, ignorance of Brahman has created this misapprehension, this mithya of the world. And this is the mithya we're all stuck in. This is the mithya we're all entangled in. Roots stretch below as actions, binding men to the world. We're all entangled in this mithya because of our vasanas, because of our attachments. We're all bound. We don't have time to even contemplate upon this. What do you mean by bound? You may ask. What do you mean by bound? You don't have time. You don't have interest. You don't have inclination to even think about these things. Even if you have the inclination, it's too burdensome. You're too caught up with your day-to-day concerns and issues and problems and expectations and wishes and hopes and goals, everything. You're just caught up with it. Nobody has time for God. Nobody has time for contemplation. Even if we have time for God, it's usually just to ask Him for something. Something is not working out in the world, so we remember God. We don't remember God for God per se. We remember God usually because we want something. I'm not criticizing. I'm talking about the nature of our minds. What is it attracted to? Where does it go? And why does it go where it goes? Nobody has time for this. Why? Because we are all bound to the world. And this bind will continue. Here comes the idea of punarapi jananam, punarapi mananam, punarapi jananam, punarapi mananam. Again birth, again death, again birth, again death. This process will continue so long as you're attached. This process will continue so long as you're attached. You need knowledge. You need knowledge of detachment to end this cycle. You need knowledge of detachment to wake up from this ignorance. You need knowledge of detachment to slowly erase the mithya and realize the satya. What is this detachment? This is what he talks about in the next verse. In the next verse, he introduces this idea of what we have just talked about the infinite nature, the inconceivable nature of the world. And then he brings about the idea of detachment in verse number 3. Non-attachment, the acts of liberation. न रूपमस्येह तथोपलभ्यते नान्तो न चादिर्न च सम्प्रतिष्ठाः अश्वत्थमेनं सुविरूढमूलम् असङ्गशस्त्रेण दृढेन चित्वा न रूपमस्येह तथोपलभ्यते नान्तो न चादिर्न च सम्प्रतिष्ठाः अश्वत्थमेनं सुविरूढमूलम् असंग दृढ़ेन छित्वा. इसका रूप वैसा यहां नहीं पाया जाता है. न इसका कोई आदि है, न इसका कोई अंत है, न यह कहीं स्थित है. इसलिए इस अति दृढ़ मूल वाले अश्वत्थ को दृढ़ वैराग्य रूपी शस्त्र द्वारा ही काटें. Its form is not perceived here as such, neither is its end nor origin nor clear foundation. Cut asunder this firmly rooted ashwatha with the strong axe of non-attachment. The first verse is an explanation. The first part of this verse is an explanation of the philosophy, what we have talked about right now. And the second part is, in no uncertain terms, a suggestion, a guidance from the Lord. The first half of this verse, which is talking about its form is not perceived here as such. He's talking about the Ashwatha. Ashwatha represents the world. This world, what is its form? It's not quite perceived here entirely. We're not quite clear about its end or its origin. It doesn't seem to have a clear foundation. Where does this world come about? How does it come about? What is the foundation? Foundation is something that clearly, solidly supports something. What is that foundation of this world? What is the foundation of this world? In Vedanta, a lot of emphasis is placed upon contemplating upon the nature of your dream, the nature of deep sleep. Vedanta says this world you are experiencing is nothing but A waking world, this world you're experiencing right now, is a waking world. No sooner than you exit this waking state of consciousness, it dissolves. This waking world dissolves the moment you exit the waking world of consciousness and enter a dream. What happens? You roll out a dream world. When you're dreaming, where is this world? Where is it? For you, where is this dream world? Where is this waking world? While you're dreaming, while you're dreaming, you're in the dream world. It's a completely different world. It's a completely different phenomenon. It may have similarities in terms of the objects you imagine there to be, but nothing in the dream comes back into the waking world. Suppose in the dream you get bruised on your arm, and then you wake up with a bruised arm. Does it happen? It happens only in horror movies. It happens only in horror movies. One of the most horrific things sometimes they show is that someone is imagining, like dreaming that something is happening to them. And that same thing appears in the waking state. It only happens in horror movies. Don't try to make your life a horror movie. What you experience in the dream doesn't translate into the waking state. You may dream something similar in the waking state. That's what you have experienced in the waking state. That is different. But it's not something that altogether happens in the dream, immediately occurs in the waking state or transpires in the waking state as well. It's completely different. It's a completely different portal of experience. So, point here is what we're talking about is what is the foundation of this world? This world exists so long as you are in this state of consciousness. The moment you exit the state of consciousness, this world dissolves. We imagine this world has a solid foundation beyond our existence. That is the biggest assumption we make about this world, that this world exists beyond our consciousness. There's a very famous philosophical question. This doesn't quite have an answer. It's more of something you should ponder about. It says, if a tree falls in the middle of the forest, if a tree falls in the middle of the forest, where nobody sees it fall, nobody hears it fall, nobody feels it fall, nobody has an experience of that tree falling. If a tree falls in the middle of a forest, an isolated forest, and nobody hears or sees or feels it fall, did it actually fall? Did it actually fall? I'm not asking you to answer the question. This is something to think about. You may say, I believe it has fallen. I believe it has not fallen. You can believe whatever you want to. That's not what we're asking you to. Just sit with this thought, because it's a very subtle thought. Now, quantum mechanics in its progression is talking about the nature of reality, how the world you experience is completely a product of your consciousness. Quantum physics is saying this, not in as many terms. It's a lot subtler than that, but this is what it is indicating to. So what is the nature of this world? What is the foundation of this world? Is there a solid world beyond your imagination? What Vedanta declares is no. What Vedanta declares is there is not. And you have to experience it. You can get a suspicion of it through your daily experience. The moment you exit the state, you go into a dream. What happens to this world? It's gone. The moment you exit the dream and go into sleep, what happens to all the other worlds? It's gone. There's no world in sleep. There's nothingness, as it were. So what is the foundation of this world? And yet, this foundationless state of consciousness we are completely attached and entangled in. That is the irony. That is the irony. Something that has no foundation, something that will simply, every night it disappears, and eventually one day, khuda na khasta, one day it will disappear for you, it will disappear for me. When the time comes to say bye bye, what will happen? This entire world will just disappear at death. This entire world will disappear at death, which is why Adi Shankaracharya says, Bhaja Govindam, Govindam Bhaja Mudhamate, Samprapte Sannihite Kale, Nahi Nahi Rakshati, Dukkrin Karne. All these things, all these Dukkrin Karne, all these Dukkrin Karne is a symbol for your worldly entanglement. All these things you're entangled and obsessing over, these will not help you in Kale, in the destined time, when it is time to say bye-bye. This entire world you will leave behind. It will completely dissolve. You'll not take anything ahead with you, what you're engaging in. Only thing you will take ahead with you is your spiritual evolution. Bhaja Govindam. Try to know. Bhaja Govindam. Govindam represents God, Brahman. Bhaja. Think about it. Contemplate about it. Pursue it. Detachment. You have to fight on the spiritual path. The spiritual path is a war. The spiritual path is a war between you and your attachment. The spiritual path is a war between you and your attachment. And detachment is depicted as a strong axe, the Shastra, Vairagya Rupi Shastra. And with that axe, you have to chop off this tree. You have to, your growth spiritually is represented by your detachment from the world. Now, the problem is that nobody understands detachment. Even right now, even after explaining all of this, even after 9 months of being in this class, 6 months of being in this class, many people will misunderstand what I'm saying right now. What is detachment? And I feel compelled to explain again what is detachment. Detachment does not mean separation. Detachment does not mean physical removal. Detachment does not mean you give up anything. Detachment does not mean that you stop caring. These are all misunderstandings of detachment. Detachment, we have talked about previously. And if we have to summarize, what is detachment? What is detachment? We can summarize it in two things. If you have to summarize what is detachment, we can summarize it in two things. One is removal of all feeling of ownership. Nothing is yours. One of the strongest ways in which attachment expresses itself is a sense of ownership, in a sense of possessiveness, in a sense of mindness. Detachment means removal of this mindness. You're not removing the possession. You're not getting rid of the possession. You're not getting rid of the object. You're not getting rid of the person. You're not getting rid of the business. What you are getting rid of is your possessiveness towards your possession, towards whatever you are engaging with. The mind has a nature to become possessive about whatever it contacts. Even a stranger, within a week, you spend a week with them, you'll become possessive about them. Why didn't you tell me that you are thinking about this? Why didn't you tell me that you're going to go? Why didn't you tell me? The idea that They owe an explanation to you. Where does that come from? It comes from a sense of possessiveness. That's a basic thread of possessiveness. So the first strand of detachment is getting rid of this mindness, mama bhav, getting rid of this possessiveness of your possession, not getting rid of your possession. The best of people, who deserves to possess? Who deserves to possess everything? One who is dispossessive, one who lacks possessiveness, one who has no possessiveness. If you don't have possessiveness, you'll become a Janaka. Who is a Janaka? Janaka is one who possesses everything, but has no possessiveness for anything. He's a king. He possesses everything. He can buy anything he wants in the world. He can possess anything he wants in the world, but he has no possessiveness for it. And the second aspect of detachment is understanding the ephemeral nature and understanding the transience, understanding the impermanence of everything. Nothing lasts forever. No thing is eternal. Everything has a birth and a death. Everything has a start and a beginning. Everything has a beginning and an end. Start and an end, I meant. Everything has a beginning and an end. Human mind, the second aspect of attachment, the human mind becomes dependent on whatever it contacts. And no sooner than you become dependent than you fear losing it. You fear being separated from it. So these are the two, broadly, if you have to summarize, the two main pillars of detachment. And how does this come about? This comes about with knowledge. There's no other way. This comes about through knowledge, through your own reflection. We are simply, what you're doing here is Shravana. What you're doing here is listening to me. You have to go back and contemplate upon this. You have to go back and study this. And study is not a casual process. See, Shravana is not sufficient. Simply listening is not sufficient. Simply even talking is not sufficient. Do you go back and take notes? Do you revise those notes? See, one of the most helpful things that we did in the ashram was summarizing our entire chapter. For example, अभी हमने chapter 14 किया है. तो chapter 14 में 3-4 या फिर 5 parts होते हैं. It's like five topics broadly. If you study Swami Parthasarthi's Bhagavad Gita, he has divided it into a few parts. If you study Gita Ji by Guruji, he has also divided the chapter based on the flow of thought into several parts. Now, you as a learner, I as a learner, what is the purpose of our learning? What is the meaning of our learning? We don't have to simply only listen. That is only the starting point. After this, what do we have to do? We have to go and study. We take notes, we go to the textbook, we try to bring the two together. And then in our own understanding, try to summarize what is the meaning of these verses. Until and unless we go through that exercise. When anybody wants to study abroad, and this is where we have to appreciate some of these systems. If you want to go to the US to study, I'm sure many of you will be familiar. If you're hoping, imagining your kids to go study abroad, you have to give the SATs, the SATs. And something very good about the SAT, at least which I truly believe has been a very good exercise. It's called critical reading and critical writing. Critical reading and critical writing. The ability to, what is critical reading? Critical reading is the ability to read a page and then summarize it in your own words. It's a very, very good exercise. It's a very, very good exercise. When you read critically and summarize, if I say turn 3 paragraphs into one paragraph, I've given you 3 paragraphs. It could be about any topic. It could be about law of karma. 3 paragraphs about the law of karma. Now summarize it into 7 or 8 lines. It's a very good exercise if you have to do it for yourself, because you have to decide what is important, what is not important, what can I condense, what must I write, what can I leave out, all these thoughts. And that is what tests your understanding. The more fluent you are, in any subject, the more easily you can express it. And if you're not able to express it easily, it means there is a gap in your understanding. If there is any topic I'm not able to explain easily to you, it means there is a gap in my understanding. That's true for everyone. So your study, your manana is this. Now, we can have as many classes and lectures as you want. So this topic of detachment, we talk about it and about it and about it. You have to take it beyond Shravana. Otherwise, it's like you're not using the axe. You're only talking about the axe. We're only talking about the axe. What we have to do is use the axe and cut off this attachment. We have to use the axe to liberate ourselves, but that will require your effort. So with that thought, we'll conclude today's class, and we'll continue our discussion and our study through chapter 15 tomorrow. See you tomorrow, same place. Hari Om. Tat Sat. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.